Hello, welcome to Micro Minutes. My name's Marty Jobson, and today, under the microscope, we're going to be looking at these things, these lovely flowers. Dandelions, of course. Now, I must admit, I did have a bit of a panic this morning when I got up and I looked out at my lawn, which last week has been absolutely covered in dandelions, and there were none to be seen. Now, I had realised that dandelions, what they do is they close themselves up at night. So if you go out at night and you look at your lawn, you won't see any dandelions. They're all closed up. But what I hadn't realised is that they're actually also temperature dependent. And if it's cold and the temperature has dropped suddenly, last week had lovely warm weather. This week, horrible cold, 3 degrees, 4 degrees this morning. No dandelions. But fortunately, you bring them in and they open up nicely like that. So anyway, so we've got lots of lovely dandelions there. So we're going to put them under the microscope. Oh, and actually, before I start, the name dandelion actually comes from, refers to the leaf. And it's the French Dandelion, which literally means the lion's tooth or lion's teeth. And they reckon that's why, that's what the leaves look like. Lion's teeth, although they look kind of more like shark's teeth to me, but you know, what do I know? So let's have a look at what is going on with a dandelion. So what I've got here is I've got a dandelion that I sort of decapitated, and I've placed in a little pot so that we can look at it under the microscope. So let me put myself up in that corner there, and then if I put that there like that, we can see what is going on with the dandelion. And there it is. Gorgeous yellow colour when you get them under the microscope. Even the skankiest dandelion, when you look at it sort of whole, it might look a bit scabby, but when you put it under the microscope, suddenly everything is sort of this beautiful yellow colour. And you can see really clearly sort of what's going on here. And what we've got here on the outside are what look like the petals, and then inside here there's all sorts of weird, complicated stuff going on. It turns out it's actually quite difficult to look at a dandelion like this if you sort of just look at it top down. I mean, if I show you the centre of the dandelion there like that, it really is quite confusing to see what's going on. And there's quite a lot of it, even if I sort of focus all the way down to the bottom and then back up again. So what I'm going to do is I'm going to slice a dandelion in half so that we can sort of see it cut open, as it were. So let me put the desk camera back on, and what I'll do is I'll choose a dandelion that is going to be sacrificed for our microscopy, and I'm going to choose this one here. I choose you, and cut this open using a sharp knife, and I've got to go this way, I've got to go more that way so that you can see what's going on. So I'll start sort of down here and then just do that, and then like that, and then hopefully that has sliced it in half nicely. Let's have a look, which half shall we use? We'll use this half here, and I'll put that in my little pot like this, and now we can look top down onto the dandelion. So that goes back under there, and we can look at the dandelion. There you go. And you can start to see a little bit more detail. And what you've got there is the whole dandelion now cut in half from the bottom there to the top. And actually, each dandelion is not one flower. It's loads and loads and loads of little, what are called florets, little mini flowers. And you can see the base of all the flowers are here. Okay, so here's the base of each individual flower. And this, at the bottom here, you have the ovary. So that's the female bit where the egg is, the ova that will become the seeds. Then you've got this bit here. There's a whole load of fluffy stuff. And actually what happens is when the seed begins to form here, this little stemmy bit here, that extends, and this fluffy stuff here becomes the seed head, you know, on the dandelion head. That's the bit that becomes the seed head. But then above that, you've got the bits that are actually coloured. And this is a little bit more complicated. So the coloured bits over to the side here, right over here, these bits here, which are out of focus at the moment, focus. These bits, which you might think, oh, these are the petals, they're not actually petals. These are technically what are known as bracts. Doesn't really matter. But they're not the real petals. The real petals you find associated with these structures Let's see if I can find a good one. So let's look at this one here. So these structures here, and what these are again, it's slightly complicated. As always with plant biology, there seem to be more exceptions to the rule than there are rules. So normally in a plant you will have the male parts that produce the pollen, the anthers, and the female parts, the stigma, the style, where which sit on top of where the seed is going to be produced, and then you end up with the pollen going onto the female parts. But in here, they're sort of together, because this is actually here, hidden inside this sort of yellow sheath, is where the anther is. This is where the pollen is produced, and then the female part, the stigma, grows up through that, forming these long sort of tongues almost that come out, that are sort of split at the top, and the pollen ends up covering these things all over them, and then wrapped around that is the actual petal. And here's one of the petals here, okay, just in the background there, and there's another one here, and they sort of peel away in one piece, leaving the individual florets sort of as it were naked, with just the female bits sticking up at the top and the pollen all over the female bits. Now, normally, obviously, what happens is a bee comes along, grabs the nectar, which is lurking right down here at the bottom, sips away at that, and as it's sipping away at that, it picks up a load of this pollen. And what I wanted to do is I wanted to just zoom in on some of the pollen and what's actually going on these female parts here, because they're covered in it. And normally what would happen is the female parts of the plant would not have any pollen on them until the bee, so to speak, had visited. But in this case, that's not what happens. The female parts actually carry the pollen, and if I zoom right in like this, right, so now I'm zoomed in as close as we can get, and let's, turn the light completely off. What I need to do is I need to increase the light a little bit, and then focus this. Let's try and focus on the end of one, where hopefully we can see what's going on. That's not so good, that's not so good. Here, look, here's one that's just starting to sort of split open at the tip. Okay, so that's the very tip now of the stigma. So this is the female part, and this is where eventually the pollen will grow a tube down, all the way down to the bottom where the seed is, and fertilise the seed, and then we'll get the seed heads forming. But at the moment, that pollen is all over the outside, just waiting to be picked up by a bee. And you can see, if we sort of, that's as close as I can go with this microscope. I'm trying to find a good one that isn't obscured, unfortunately. Actually, I wonder whether the reason is, that's why, is because I've got some above that are getting in the way. So here's a good one. This is the tip of one of those little stigmas, and you can see the pollen sitting on it. So every single one of these tiny little specks is an individual pollen grain. And those pollen grains, if you actually zoom in a bit closer, what they look like is this, okay? And if I turn my desk camera back on, I can show you the pollen grain. So this is actually what a pollen grain from, well, it's actually a very closely related species. This is autumn hawkbit, which is very closely related to the dandelion. And this pollen, this is what's happened to here is the lovely folk, look, there's a little face there. Hello. And it's sort of regular, and it's covered in these amazing spikes. And every single one of those pollen grains looks essentially like this. The lovely folks over at the 3D Pollen Project, Oliver Wilson, got in touch with me and said, hey, do you want to have some of my 3D pollen data? So what I did was I took some of the data that he had, which was where they take a microscope and they essentially create a 3D model using slices that they create. And I created a 3D printable version and then printed it out myself. And there's links below, and you can go and have a look at the data yourself, and it's free to use as long as you credit them appropriately. But that's what the pollen looks like. And it's interesting because you see all these spiky bits on it. What that means is that, number one, it sticks to those surfaces more easily, those vertical surfaces, the stigma. But also, if there's any hairs on a bee's leg, for example, it'll hook onto the spikes and get caught on the bee's legs and carried away. So if I zoom out again so that we can sort of see this in all its beauty, there it is. All those individual florets covered in pollen. Aren't they good? they're lovely. So, as always, thanks go to Zeiss for providing me with these microscopes so that I can show you stuff. I'm going to stop there because I've been rabbiting on for 10 minutes. But please retweet this, send it out, tell your friends about it, and join me again on Wednesday for Zoology Wednesday, when I'll be looking at something completely different. And there's a huge back catalogue of these things that I do lurking out there on the internet. So, thanks very much for watching. My name's Marty Jobson. Goodbye.